The Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe and I'm your host today. And today and tomorrow, we're going to be hearing a message from Pastor Nick Shaner, our campus pastor at our Johnstown campus. And while Pastor Rob was preaching in Exodus and talking about the plagues this past Sunday, Pastor Nick was also tackling this subject, and he's looking at it from the perspective of the danger of having a hardened heart. So let's begin this message.
We're going to read from Exodus chapter 6. If you have a Bible, turn there. It'll be up on the screen as well. We're going to open Exodus chapter 6, starting in verse 28 this morning. We're going to go through a little bit here at the end of chapter 6 into chapter 7. This is what it says, starting in verse 28. Now when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you. And your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I will multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. This is the word of God for the people of God, and we say, thanks be to God. You can have a seat. I've got a few little illustrations here. They're categorized, they're summarized, you could say, in one specific type of illustration. See if you can catch on. Okay, listen closely. Are you listening? All right. Are you listening? All right. So it rained heavily, therefore the river overflowed, causing a flood. A tree fell on the power lines, therefore the power went out in the neighborhood. Those are what kind of statements? There's a couple of options if you're listening close. One might categorize these as if then. If this happens, then this happens. If it rained heavily, then the river overflowed, causing a flood. Another way of summarizing these illustrations, these examples, would be, as I put in my notes, cause and effect. Cause and effect. The cause, it rained heavily. The effect, the river overflowed, causing a flood. Cause, a tree fell on the power lines. Effect, the power went out in the neighborhood. Are you following? Say, I'm following. All right. We got more examples just to really drive this home. Cause, you ate more calories than you burned. Effect, I'll let you fill in the blank. Cause, the student didn't study for the test. Effect, the student failed the test. Cause, you didn't get enough sleep. The effect, you felt tired and irritable the next day. Cause and effect. This is another way of saying, summarizing for us this point, this truth, we could say, this truth is this. Our actions have consequences. Your actions have consequences. Consequence is defined this way: a result or an effect of an action or condition. Consequence, a result or effect of an action or condition. Consequence. We don't like that word, do we? Consequence. Because we often associate it with what? Negative consequence, right? It doesn't always have to be that way. There can be good consequences. Just a way of saying that your actions have consequences. What you do has an effect, right? Now, our 4-year-old, my 4-year-old, is learning this as we speak. We're very much in the learning part of this reality that actions have consequences. Just this past week, it really came into a reality for her. She was not listening. Hey, We need you to put your shoes on. We're going to karate class. We need you to put your shoes on. We need you to put your karate uniform on. Just not listening, not listening, not listening. Hey, there's going to be a consequence if you don't listen. Still not listening. The cause, not listening. The effect, guess who missed karate for the first time ever? We just had to say to her, hey, karate, no, that's a consequence. We're not going. Now, that had a big reaction, as you could imagine. There were lots of tears, but we're trying, and hopefully we learn this as we grow and mature. Do we always? No. We need reminded, that's why I'm sharing this all with you this morning. No, the hope is that we learn this early on, but we don't always learn that actions have consequences. The Lord said to Moses, then I will lay my hand on Egypt with mighty acts of judgment, and I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. God says, with mighty acts of judgment, I will put on Egypt. These mighty acts of judgment, you might also have know them as the plagues. The mighty acts of judgment we summarize as the Egyptian plagues. Are you familiar with the Egyptian plagues? There's 10 of them, right? Do you have all 10 memorized? Anybody? Oh, yeah, there's frogs in there. I wrote them down. I couldn't, repeat them just from memory, but 10 of these plagues, these mighty acts of judgment on Egypt. The first one being blood, and then turning the Nile River into blood, and frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, the firstborn. All of these plagues came upon Egypt. Pharaoh and Egypt. And verse 5 states, if we look in the text, chapter 7, verse 5, states the twofold purpose of the Lord's mighty acts of judgment. He says, this is what will happen. This is why these things are happening. Number one, this is the twofold purpose. The first purpose, the Egyptians will know that He is Yahweh, that He is the Lord. That Pharaoh and Egypt will know that I am the Lord. The Lord was revealing Himself to the Egyptians through these mighty acts of judgment to prove to the Egyptians that He alone is God. That He alone is God, and that they will experience and acknowledge Yahweh's supreme authority and power over all creation and all nations. This would have been very difficult for the people of Egypt and Pharaoh, because why? They worshipped a lot of different gods. Pharaoh believed himself to be a god. The Egyptians worshipped many deities. Pharaoh himself thought himself to be a god, a deity. Many of the plagues then, as we just mentioned them, were aimed at these deities, these gods of Egypt, so that God could prove Himself to be above all those, to prove to the Egyptians that He was the greatest one, that He is greater than all other gods, that there's no other God that could deliver the Egyptians from those judgments other than Him. First purpose. Second purpose, Israel will know and experience the deliverance from Egypt. He says, with mighty acts of judgment, I will do this upon Egypt, and I will deliver my people. I will bring the people of Israel. Remember, they were in Egypt as slaves, right? For hundreds of years, they were slaves, and God says, I will bring these mighty acts of judgment on this people, and through that, with that, I will bring deliverance for the Israelites. He will indeed bring His people from the land of slavery and bondage to the land of promise. Remember, that was part of God's promise and covenant, that I will give them a land and they will live there, and I will be their God and they will be my people. Israel will know through these mighty acts of judgment upon Egypt. Israel will know, not just in a head knowledge, but they will experience firsthand and acknowledge that Yahweh, that the Lord is indeed a delivering God. So what can we take away from this early part? We can take away this, that God's purpose, you remember, part of God's purpose, God's covenant, God's promise was to the people of Israel, right? To Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to make them into a great nation. But not only that, to multiply their descendants and their family and the people, but to give them a land, right? And that land was not where? Egypt. There was another land, but the people living in captivity and slavery and bondage needed to be delivered from that into the promise that God had for them. So what we can gather from all of this initially is that God's purposes to bless cannot be stopped by human evil. That's important. That God's purposes cannot be stopped by human efforts and attempts. That's what Pharaoh was doing. By keeping them there, not letting them go, he was attempting to stop God's purpose. God is the promise maker and the promise keeper, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop God. Now, what we don't want to proclaim, there's a couple of things that when we read through these plagues, and if you were to keep reading on in chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, and the chapters following this, you would see all these plagues described. Now, we're not going to go individually through each one. I know you're all sad about that. We're just giving an overview of these plagues. But what we don't want to do is look at these plagues and we could misinterpret or misapply these things. The first way that we could do that is by saying, oh, God brought all of these tragedies and these mighty acts of judgment upon Egypt and the Egyptians. And what we might be tempted to do in our world today is to look out around the world and see these natural disasters and think that God is bringing judgment on whoever people are in the wake of that. We don't want to do that. Amen? Just because there are tragedies in nature that happen, it's not always God's mighty act of judgment for whatever reason, okay? So that would be a misapplication to these plagues, because we just think about what's making the news right now. There's apparently a very strong hurricane that's headed towards Jamaica and those little islands down there, and or sometimes we hear of like these great forest fires, and sometimes, let's be honest, we see, or maybe or even ourselves, we say, oh, well, that is God bringing judgment upon what... I'm not here to say yes or no, but we can't just say just because we see that here, that's always what's happening, okay? And that's always what's behind the reasoning. But for the Egyptians, okay, which we're focusing on here, but for the Egyptians during the time of Moses, these natural just tragedies that we see in the plagues, they were mighty acts of judgment from God. These mighty acts of judgment, the Egyptian plagues, were the consequences. They were the consequences of something. They were the effect of a cause. What was the cause? What was the result or effect of an action or condition? What was the action or condition? God told Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh said what? No, I will not listen to God. Because he had a hard heart. This is the cause. Pharaoh had a hard heart, and it continued to harden even through these mighty acts of judgment. He continually refused to listen to the Lord. If we go back to the first interaction between Moses and Pharaoh, Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. You can hear the contempt and the disgust, even at the very mention, the request, the demand of that. Pharaoh says, who is the Lord? Because what is he thinking, hearing this? I'm insulted that to even be brought that in the first place. Who is the Lord? A rhetorical way of saying the Lord to Pharaoh, he means nothing to me. Pharaoh regarded himself as a god over Egypt and the people there. No one was to give Pharaoh orders, right? Certainly not the God of those people that he had enslaved. Their God is going to try to tell me what to do? No way. Pharaoh is saying, I am the final authority over everything and everyone in Egypt. Pharaoh is saying, with that, who is the Lord? I am the one that determines the destiny of this slave community. I will not let the people of Israel go, Pharaoh says. He's not yielding to the demand of the Lord, which means yielding. If he was to yield to the Lord, it meant yielding his own self. By his own defiant refusal to the Lord's demand, Pharaoh is insisting, no, I don't yield to you, Lord. You yield to me. That's a scary place to be. Pharaoh's insisting that I am the one in charge here. These mighty acts of judgment were the result. They were because Pharaoh had a hard heart, and it continued to harden. What does it mean to harden your heart? Number one, it means to see clear evidence of the hand of God at work. You're seeing God at work, you're seeing his power on display, and you're still refusing to accept his word and his truth and to submit to his will by giving up your own. It means refusing to yield to the Lord. If we look in Exodus chapter 14, we see that, chapter 7, verse 14, Pharaoh's heart was unyielding. His heart would not give way. Yield means to give way, to let go of your own self, to give way to something else, and that meant to give way to the Lord instead of his. And he was refusing to do that. His heart was unyielding. Again, another scary place to be. What does it mean to harden your heart? When you are confronted with the truth, what do you do?
Well, we hope you've enjoyed the first half of this message. Tune back in tomorrow and we'll finish that up with Pastor Nick. In the meantime, if you'd like some resources that go along with his message, you can go to shepnaz.org/daily, and there you'll see a 5-day devotional, a group leader guide, a parent guide, and notes to follow along. For Pastor Nick, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.